India, the Institute Montaigne, and the Fundação Oriente. It is my privilege and honor
Good afternoon,
to introduce
good morning, and
very
welcome.
special
On behalf of Carnegie India, the Institute Montaigne,
Jaishankar,
and the Fundação Oriente, it is my privilege
and Augusto Santos Silva, the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal. Your Excellencies, thank you so very much. We are deeply honored that you have found the time for this important conversation, which will no doubt set the frame of reference for a further 2 days of deliberations on issues from technology transfers to global supply chains and the future of the Indo-Pacific to stronger business ties between those in government, in the private sector, and subject matter experts in India and the EU. This is the third such dialogue co-hosted by Carnegie India, the Institute Montaigne in France, and the Fundação Oriente based in Portugal. Could I please also introduce Francois Godemont, a moving force in the EU-India equation, a senior advisor for Asia at the Institute Montaigne, and the moderator for this inaugural conversation. Francois, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rudra. Minister Jaishankar, Minister Santos Silva, we could listen to you for hours given all that's happening globally, and also because we hear of intensifying relations between Europe and India. You had a very interesting summit last summer with quite the communique, I would say, of intentions. But we only have half an hour, which we are very thankful for that you gave us. So I will give the floor for a first speech by Minister Jaishankar. I will turn then to Minister Santos Silva, and perhaps try and frame a few questions that would flow from your exposés. Minister, your turn. Thank you so much again.
Thank you, Francois. Let me say I'm delighted to join Foreign Minister Augusto Silva and address the opening session of the India-EU Strategy Group. The discussions, which I'm sure you'll be holding, comes at a time when India steps up its engagement with the EU. That Prime Minister Modi has visited Europe 16 times in the last 6 years, that 4 of the 6 virtual summits we have done during the COVID period are with the EU and its member states, that I myself have spoken to 19 of my EU counterparts during this period. And indeed, the intensity of our engagement now in Brussels, I think all of this must tell you something. We are particularly encouraged that Portugal will once again assume the presidency of the Council of the European Union in January 2021. Its leadership can make a big difference to taking our partnership to greater heights. Now, the merits of this relationship really require no explanation, whether it is politics or security, trade or investment, mobility or technology. We have steadily discovered the benefits of closer cooperation. For an India that is focused today on deep reform and profound transformation, Europe is a natural partner when it comes to resources, technology, or best practices. On their part, Europeans need to appreciate the scale of this change and the opportunities that emerge from it, whether it is access to electricity or drinking water, financial inclusion or low-cost housing. We are talking of hundreds of millions being directly impacted in a very short time frame. The new demands that these processes generate contribute to the emergence of an additional engine of growth for the world economy. But my focus today is on the larger relevance of the India-EU partnership for the world. We are each political and economic poles in an increasingly multipolar world. Our ability to work together, therefore, can help shape global outcomes. Consider the 4 big issues that Prime Minister Modi laid out before the G20: technology, talent, transparency, and trusteeship. There is no question that the nature of the emerging technosphere is one of the big debates of our times. Even as we assess its implications, we are grappling with framing policies and creating regimes. Clearly, as democratic societies and market economies, we have strong convergences. As regards talent, its smoother flow is essential to the building of a knowledge economy. That is why India is so open to concluding migration and mobility agreements with its key European partners. We are all better served by legal and predictable movement of people. As for transparency, its value for international relations is just as great as its requirement for governance. It is also central to the creation of a rules-based global order. We are also realizing the importance of trusted and resilient supply chains. With regard to trust issue, we all have a commitment to leave the world better than we entered it, or at the very least, not damage it for future generations. This has a particular resonance in climate change and biodiversity. Our cooperation can take many forms and unfold in multiple ways. We can make a big difference in vaccine production and renewable energy. We can harmonize our developmental partnerships from Africa to the CARICOM and the Pacific Islands. We can influence the creation of fairer globalization and more effective multilateralism. Our engagement and synergy can surely help create a greener, humor-centric, and cooperative world. Do think big in your conversations and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I turn to you, Minister Santos Silva.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here with my colleague and friend, Minister Jaishankar, and also with you, Professor François Godemont, and also Professor Rudra Chaudhry. As you know, Portugal will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union next semester, from January to June 2021. And in what regards the external policy of the European Union, one of our main priorities is to organize an informal leaders meeting between all the heads of state and government of the European Union and the Prime Minister Modi, the Prime Minister of India. This meeting is already scheduled for May in Oporto, the second most important city in Portugal. And it will be organized back-to-back to the meeting of the European Council. This is very important for us, and for us this means a very important political boost to the relationship between Europe and India, which we consider one of the top subjects in our agenda. And why? I think for four reasons, four main reasons. The first one is that India and European Union are among the largest democratic spaces in the world. The 1.3 billion people living in India and the more than 400 million people living in the European Union form the two largest democratic spaces in the world. And this convergence, as Minister Jaishankar has already referred to, is very important, and it is a very objective ground for the reinforcement of our relations. The second reason is that we are already strategic partners since 2004. India is a strategic partner to the European Union. And of course, this strategic partnership has to be fulfilled with concrete measures, with concrete conversations, with concrete arrangements. The third reason is a geopolitical one. We need a balance in the world geopolitics, and it would not be understandable that European Union that is currently investing in the relations with UK, with US, with China, with, in a very difficult way, but really with Russia, with Turkey, would ignore India. On the contrary, in order to have this balance we need in geopolitics, we have to be engaged in relations with different regions, countries, and continent and the world. And for this to be fulfilled, it is absolutely essential, the relationship with India. And fourth, last but not least, the economic dimension. As Minister has already explained, this economic dimension of the relationship between Europe and India is crucial, considering human resources, considering skills and abilities, considering trade and investment, considering technology and technology transfer. So we have this very concrete and ambitious goal that the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union can also be considered as an important political step further in the relations between the two subcontinents. And I would like to add to the agenda, Minister Jaishankar has already mentioned two other topics. The first topic is the cooperation EU-India in what regards the reform of multilateral organizations. We need to reform the UN, the United Nations, and in particular the Security Council. We are, of course, accompanying and supporting the reform that is currently conducted by the Secretary General of the United Nations. We think that this reform has to integrate a reform of the Security Council, and in the Portuguese view, this means also the enlargement of the permanent members of the Security Council, including India, Brazil, and an African country. Then we have two very urgent reforms to do in what regards the agencies and organizations of the UN system. I mean, the World Trade Organization and the World Health Organization. In these two reforms, the cooperation between EU and India is, the better will be this reform. And the other topic is the economic agenda of our relationship. We are trying to unblock, if I may use this term, unblock the negotiations between India and the European Union that in a certain way were frozen since 2013 in what regards the trade arrangement and also the protection of investment. And I think that the results of the summit held this year between EU and India were very promising, and we have now to transform them into concrete arrangements protecting the trade, our trade, and protecting our mutual investments. So I think this very concrete and precise agenda that I have in mind in my responsibility as the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Portugal, the country that will hold the presidency of the Council of the European Union next semester. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you very much, Minister. I have a feeling of optimism, given that it's clear that you converge on a number of broad goals and sometimes even more precisely. I would like to push you, not necessarily to answer individually my questions, but perhaps to start a dialogue deepening some of the issues which have come up in your presentations. You both mentioned effective multilateralism. And it's true that both the EU and India are advocates and practitioners of multilateralism. As we know, we're stuck between an established power that is tempted sometimes to retreat slightly from multilateralism, and a rising power which has a tendency to use it as an instrument for its own goals. That's perhaps not unique in the history of member states of the UN, but it's more striking today. How do you see the positioning to avoid what I would call roadblocks, gridlock in institutions because of this conflict and these two large actors?
Thank you. You know, I think it's a very good question, Francois, and whether, you know, a power is going up or rising or retreating, or sometimes it can be one and the other as well. Rather than go into that, I would say at the end of the day, you have 5 countries, you know, who are today permanent members of Security Council, who, by the way, have 5 different positions, some common, some diverse. But you also have 190 something countries who are, you know, impatient for things to work. But now just look at this year. Okay, what have we seen? I mean, we have been through the biggest crisis the global order has faced. Okay, and frankly, at the end of the day, we have seen national responses, or maybe in the case of EU, a little bit more than that, and very little really collective assessment, collective strategizing, collective, forget about collective response. Okay, so it's very clear that you know, with each passing day, the sense that the UN is currently constituted is out of date, is growing. Now, what can we do about it? I don't think it's rocket science. I think we have had these intergovernmental negotiations which kind of go around in circles. I think it's important to move to text-based negotiations. I think people need to do negotiations the way they do negotiations on every other issue, which is have a text, have you know, people spend time, then lock in what has been agreed to, then take it forward. That's the way to advance a cause, provided you want to advance it. The other very obvious example is the WTO. Now, we can have views on how well it's worked and how well it's not worked. Okay, that's legitimate. But I think with specific reference to WTO, but as a general proposition on multilateralism, because something doesn't work to your satisfaction and my satisfaction, that's not a case to walk away from it or to sort of gridlock its working. So I think there's a case for a reformed UN, there's a case for a reformed WTO, there's a case for a reformed WHO, and I completely agree with my Portuguese counterpart on this.
Thank you very much. Your turn, Minister.
Thank you very much. I would make 2 points. The first one is, you know that Europe is not a neutral party in the geopolitical conflict or conflictuality between the United States and China. We think and we feel that we belong to the same space as the United States, what we call the North Atlantic, the transatlantic community, and so on. So we are not a neutral part. Even if we have some autonomy and our interests do not coincide point by point with the interests of the Americans. But we don't observe this conflict between China, the rising power, and the United States that sometimes seem that are in a quite withdrawing tendency. We don't see this conflict as a third party. We belong to the same space as the United States, be it in terms of values, institutions, and geopolitical reference. But that said, it's very important for the European Union and for the North Atlantic to be open to the world. We live in a multipolar world, and we cannot reduce the geopolitical trends in this multipolar world to zero-sum game between two powers. This is not the right logic. The right logic, the fruitful logic, is to consider that you have United States, of course, you have China, you have European Union, you have Russia, that cannot be ignored, but you have Latin America, you have Africa, you have Japan or the Republic of Korea, you have India. So we have to engage several main global players. Global players are not only the United States and its allies, China and its power dream or power apparatus. Global players are more, are specifically a certain number of countries, regions, or international entities that have to be considered and have to be engaged in the reform of multilateralism. And this, again, means a very concrete obligation, the obligation to reinforce in Asia the Indo-Pacific region. The president-elect of the United States, Joe Biden, is I think he has a very interesting proposal, considering the reinforcement of the links between the West and the Indo-Pacific region. And we think that we can take profit of this proposal in order to reinforce as well the links between Europe and the Indo-Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to follow up with what I would call a further question on the Indo-Pac. Europeans haven't been together, the EU fully on board of the Indo-Pac concept. The EU was talking about Eurasian connectivity, which was not equivalent. Some member states have taken the lead. On the other hand, India sits literally at the core of Indo-Pac and so has been firing on all cylinders. How do you see Europeans contributing? And perhaps the question is first for Minister Santos Silva, and what balance do you make between what I would call development, environment, and security issues, which are also very much in the mind of the United States, for example, and some of the regional participants into Indo-Pac? How do you see Europe, and how do Indians see Europe balancing the two aspects? Mr. Santos Silva.
Thank you. From my point of view, I think 3 or 4 issues are determinant, are very important in shaping the relationship between Europe and Asia and the part that the Indo-Pacific region has to play in this relationship. The first dimension is the dimension of security and free movement and free navigation. It is crucial that the freedom of navigation and trade in the East Asia can be kept. And I'm speaking of the South China Sea. I'm thinking of the free transport, free trade. This is a crucial issue for India. This is a crucial issue for the Asian countries, for instance, and this is also a crucial issue for the European Union. So we have to work together. We have to cooperate. We have to work together in order to maintain this very important precondition of international trade, that is the free navigation of seas. Second topic in terms of security, but now in terms of human security, the problem of the climate change and its consequences for coastal countries or for the small islands in the Pacific. I think of the several small island states in the Pacific, but also of countries like Bangladesh that can be so hit by the rise of the level of the oceans So the importance of oceans for blue economy, for green economy, for biodiversity, but also for combating climate change and for defending the livelihood of millions of people in coastal states. This challenge, this ocean agenda, is very important. I think that India and the European Union converge on that. And as you know, Portugal will organize with Kenya the second UN conference on oceans. It was scheduled for this year in Lisbon. It had to be postponed, but we maintain our interest in co-organizing with Kenya this very important conference. And the third and last, my third and last point is, of course, the need to have the right balance between the, until now, competitive connectivity strategies that are put in place between Asia and Europe. I'm referring, of course, to the Chinese project of the Silk Road. I'm referring to the European connectivity strategy Euro-Asia, between Europe and Asia. And I think it is very important that India can engage as well in this different, in this approach, in order to avoid that any connectivity strategy can be presented and put in place as a power strategy. We don't want that. And to ensure that all the connectivity strategies that are right now in place and that we need to reinforce the communications, to reinforce the trade of goods, to reinforce the mobility of people between Asia and Europe, that all these strategies can be inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister Jaishankar, a comment, and then I'll ask the last question.
Okay, I'll make it very brief because I know we're short on time. First of all, let me say that on the points which Minister Santosh Silva made on freedom of navigation, freedom of trade, on connectivity, I think we're very much on the same page, and these are dialogues and hopefully cooperation that India and the EU will have. Now, what is the Indo-Pacific about? I mean, to my mind, the Indo-Pacific reflects three big factors. One, it reflects globalization, the interpenetration and the interdependence which comes with globalization. Number two, it reflects multipolarity, that Indo-Pacific is a landscape which is not an exclusive zone, a sphere of influence. Everybody has an interest and a presence and activity out there. And what we are trying to do through Indo-Pacific is really encourage cooperation on global goods and global commerce. Now, bear in mind for India, today more than 50% of our trade goes east of India. So we have, you know, our stakes in the Indo-Pacific are actually very, very vital. I think today we have to accept that the old narrower definitions, you know, there was a time when we thought of the Indian Ocean separately and the Pacific Ocean separately. I think today many of the Indo-Pacific sort of countries themselves and others don't think so. We welcome today the understanding which Germany has shown, France has shown, Netherlands have shown. We hope more European countries are you know, supportive of the ideas and are much more participative in making sure that, you know, we all work cooperatively out there.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think my last question will be addressed first to you, since the second one was addressed to Minister Santos Silva. You've mentioned opening, you've mentioned globalization. You've quite rightly mentioned that mobility is a component, of course, of free exchange. But on economic issues, relations with India are still not optimum. negotiations about trade, on investment with its own difficulties are there. And if I look at digital issues, I find that Europeans and Indians are in a bit of the same conundrum. That is, we're huge spaces, huge markets. We would really like to have more digital autonomy, but we lack some of the instruments, some of the firms, some of the platforms that others have. How do you see that we could speed up cooperation, team up to overcome some of these obstacles, and not necessarily only on the digital front?
Well, I think those are ongoing conversations, and clearly, I mean, it's an area, it's a negotiation where we have a lot of interest. We have underlined that to the EU. We understand that in the last few years, the EU had some other priorities because some other negotiations were more advanced. And we had not succeeded in closing it out in 2013, as Minister Santos Silva mentioned. So I think today we are talking at the highest level, you know, on our side, the Prime Minister, on your side, the leadership of the EU. Our trade ministers are in direct touch. It's a complicated negotiation. I mean, because you know, we want a fair and balanced outcome. Now, obviously, each one of us has our own priorities and interests. You know, the EU side is very focused on investment protection. We are looking very much more at movement on goods and services. There is some talk of whether we can actually do some sort of early harvest kind of solution. There is a lot of, obviously, I think mobility is also a factor. And as you rightly said, data is very much out there. And actually, it's one area where probably we have a lot of convergence in terms of larger global debate. So this is very much, it's a space which will see activity. It should see more activity. We would certainly see this as a priority. We would like very much to go forward. But I think we'll have to see where that goes.
Thank you. Minister Santos Silva, perhaps a comment which will in fact be the final comment, I think, because we're going up against time. Your turn.
Thank you very much. I again agree with my Indian colleague. I would say that we have to look to the negotiations with a realistic perspective. We are not going to conclude anything, but we can proceed in deepening the conversation, deepening the talks, and framing them as formal trade and investment negotiations in order to try to obtain an agreement. Something can be obtained as early harvest, as Minister Jaishankar has said, but we need time to conclude important and rich agreements, both on trade and on investment protection. From our part, things are easy in the sense that, you know, trade policy competences are with the European Commission. We have a unique, only one European policy in what regards trade policy issues. So our idea is that the European Council in next May, and then the informal meeting between European Council members, the heads of states and governments of Europe, and Prime Minister Modi can represent a political mandate, a clear political mandate to our teams in order to engage in negotiations that can be positive and that can be mutually beneficial. I think this is the idea, and time is now, things are now mature to have this kind of political impulse.
I'm glad we end on this positive note from the incoming president of the European Council, and these will be developments we'll all be watching. And there, Subramanian, maybe if I may, thank you very much, Minister, for your expose and very fine answers to some of the difficulties that I have raised. I hope you won't be cross with me for raising these difficulties to both of you. It is the end of this session. And again, on behalf of Institut Montaigne and Carnegie Endowment India, I thank you both for taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.